Your boys are back. We return on the Money Stop, the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano, presented by Kicking the Tires and Sharp Link Gaming. 1 week to go until the playoffs. We head to Daytona, but not before discussing, Cole, and a dominating win for William Byron and the 24 team. I think we went into this week, Cole, Watkins Glen, and we said Watkins Glen's not a lot of a wild card. We knew what we were going to get. We knew it was going to be a relatively tame race. I don't know that we thought it was going to be that seamless for William Byron to get into victory lane, but it was an absolute domination. First career road course win for William Byron, which we did not predict. Completely upfront about that. Looking through the top 10, we'll go through that in a moment, but first, fifth win of the year for William Byron. There was a point early this year, maybe a third of the way through the season, I said that William Byron should be the overwhelming favorite to win the championship, and things kind of waned. You know, Joe Gibbs had its moment. Penske had their moment. It's largely been Joe Gibbs during the summer. Martin Truex Jr. stringing together a lot of success. We've seen the upswing in the Fords, but we were expecting a Hendrick Chevy in victory lane. I picked Chase. You picked Kyle Larson. We got one, but it was William Byron. I don't think anyone was expecting that, but it was a statement win in every sense of the expression, in the sense that there's only 1 week to go in the playoffs, and William Byron proved that that team's going to be a contender at any kind of track we go to.
Yeah, and in terms of recalling William Byron a championship favorite, even with their little bit of a slump they've had the past few weeks, or I guess few months now at this rate. I feel like this is a trend we've seen a lot, where Hendrick will just kind of bide their time and just go through these motions of the summer, the dog days of summer, and just not really be as dominant as they were in the beginning of the season. But yeah, I agree. It was a statement victory. Very, very similar to the week before at Indy, simply because this race ran green pretty much the entire distance. There was very few cautions. The race ran under 2 hours, I think it was. So a lot of things happened very quickly. And at the same time, not a lot happened at all until like the last 20 laps, it felt like. And I'll put it bluntly, we did not do good this past week at Watkins Glen. We came in very hot and confident. I did, specifically with Chase Elliott for the win. So I had to eat my words there, and thankfully nobody put any dares out there, because I would definitely be doing something pretty serious this weekend. But we'll own up to that, and I just think it all happened so quickly. Like, McDowell blew an engine, Chase ran out of fuel, Kyle Larson was speeding on the money stop, just one thing after the next. All our contenders we thought that were doing fairly well just unraveled like that. And that just can't happen when you're going into the semifinal race of the regular season. And, I think we're not going to have that much safety going into this week at Daytona as well. It's going to be another wild card. I mean, we didn't predict Watkins Glen to be a wild card, but it ended up being that. And I'm really pumped for this one, because Daytona is just so fun to bet on. And I'm going to give 3 simple rules for this episode and for betting going forward for super speedways, but specifically for this episode. Don't bet big, go with your gut, and have fun. And that's all it's going to be. We're going to go off the cuff here, pick our favorite sleepers and values, and go give our reasons why we like these drivers and why we think we could see them in the victory lane or putting up a good result. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you guys have to agree. So I think the rule of thumb here is going to be that these are our favorites. You're going to have your own drivers that you have faith in, and go with your gut, but just have fun with this episode and take our advice for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like you said, no one is invincible to any kind of any track we go to, even at a place like Watkins Glen. Just to put a capper on those thoughts, I thought it was funny to hear you say it kind of feels like Hendrick Motorsports always has that, dog days of summer where they're not quite as competitive. I remember back during the number 48 team dynasty days, there was almost a conspiracy about the fact that they were sandbagging the entire summer, because the first week the playoffs started, they flipped the switch. And that's just something that we've seen over the course of decades of dominance with Hendrick Motorsports, and specifically Jimmy Johnson and the 48 team. And it was funny to hear you say that, because it was kind of something that was buried in the back of my mind. And seeing the way William Byron and that 24 team sort of flipped the switch at a track they've never won at or even looked competitive at was interesting to see. But like you said, when you look at the way things kind of broke down with, like you said, it was just kind of a comedy of errors between running out of gas. How does that even happen? I know it's a long track, but like a team that's going, that it's literally in a must-win situation at Chase's best track. How do you run out of gas? Kyle Larson, the team that is notoriously the best at the money stop, the 5 team, he has speeds on pit road. How does that happen? And then Michael McDowell, coming off of a win the prior week, has a mechanical failure. So it's like those are the things you can't account for. You can't predict them, but they're going to happen at some point. And as we get into the playoff discussions in coming weeks, you're entitled to a mulligan every once in a while. And I guess we kind of got one last week at Watkins Glen. But William Byron picks up win number 5 in complete command of that race from start to finish. Recapping the top 10, William Byron did finish first. Denny Hamlin in second. Christopher Bell, one of the names we did highlight, finished third. AJ Allmendinger, after a no-show the week prior in Indy, finished fourth. Ty Gibbs in fifth. Martin Truex Jr. sixth. Chris Buescher, another road course top 10, finished seventh. Tyler Reddick eighth. Ryan Blaney ninth. And Joey Logano top 10. Moving to our next segment, though, we're going to discuss the fact that our nickel or dime segment is actually moving to social media. This was a move we made over the past couple of weeks based on some demand for other discussions as far as parlay bets and things of that nature that we're going to bring in the end of the episode. So we'll discuss some parlay bets for Daytona later in the episode. And in order to make room for that, moving our paint scheme review topics here over to social media. So head to @the_money_stop on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We'll have a graphic posted with all of the important paint schemes this week. We'll give our nickels, our 5 out of 10s, our dimes, our 10s out of 10s. And we'll see what we got this week on that front in Watkins Glen, but it's going to be on social media @the_money_stop. Couple things to keep into consideration here as we go to Daytona. First and foremost, this is the final race before the cutoff, and there are 15 out of 16 spots in the playoffs completely locked in. As far as points go, Bubba Wallace is in the good right now. He is relatively comfortable on points, but you go to a super speedway, and that's not saying very much, especially when you consider any driver behind him in the standings can go out there and win on Saturday night, actually, is when the race is, and potentially punch their ticket to the playoffs. So there's going to be a lot of hungry and desperate and urgent drivers from the front of the pack to the back of the pack. No one has anything to lose, especially when you consider even the playoff drivers. They're racing for playoff points with 1 week to go. They have no bars held back. So that's something to keep into consideration, as well as the fact that we're going to determine the starting lineup on Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern time for Daytona. Again, it is a Saturday night race. It's one of the best race weekends of the year. We've both got our Daytona gear on. I mean, it's one of the truly world-class venues in all of sports, especially motorsports, and it's just, they call it the World Center of Racing for a very good reason, and I could not be more excited for this race. So as we take it to the bank, Cole, discussing the odds on favorites per at BetMGM pre-qualifying. That's also per SharpLink Gaming. Starting with the favorites, at co-favorites, in fact, Chase Elliott, who must win this race. We saw what happened last week when he needed to win. He is the co-favorite with Denny Hamlin, who is one of the most winning drivers at Daytona. They're both valued at plus 1,200. Then you have a three-way tie for the second highest in odds between Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney, and Brad Keselowski, who are each plus 300. So, Cole, as we kick it into our favorites category, and again, going off the cuff here, not a ton of numbers because it is Daytona. We'll work in a couple where they make sense. But again, we're going off our guts. That's what you have to do when we go super speedway racing, especially when there are stakes on the line like this. Before I pass it over to you, I will also say at this particular Daytona cutoff race, prior to the playoffs, we have seen the driver that's won this race has been a first-time winner that season, 4 of the last 5 years. So as we discuss these favorites, keep that in consideration. But Cole, kick it off. Give me your favorites this week.
All right. First off, I want to just call out the odds makers here because I personally am not touching Chase Elliott this weekend. And maybe a sour taste in my mouth from Watkins Glen. But truthfully, when I think of Daytona, I do not think of Chase Elliott. Talladega maybe, but this has been a track that's eluded him in his young career, albeit, and he needs to win this race. But honestly, I just think that this seems like a bit of a bait for me. Co-favorite with Denny Hamlin, there's just no credibility there. I think it's just a complete crapshoot. Sure, there's going to be 3 teammates in this race, 2 technically, because you have another one that's chasing that final playoff spot. But I just don't think that's a very smart bet to make. But that's just how I feel. If you guys feel differently, obviously go with your gut. That's just my 2 cents and kind of how I view these these top 5 in the odds. But one more thing I want to throw out there as a piece of advice for betting Daytona and Talladega, actually. Whenever you go into these races, how I kind of approach it is, I'll go with 2 drivers I feel really, really good about, and they'll be relatively esteemed on these types of tracks. I'll throw $10 on them because, I mean, the favorites in this race are plus 1,200. So all the money you lost last week, taking our advice, you can gain back with one hit for this week. So if you bet $10 on 2 drivers you feel good about, and one of those hits, that's great. But I recommend doing $10 on 2 of your gut favorites, and then $5 on maybe 3 dark horses, and then you have 5 ponies in the race, and if one hits, you're going to come out ahead. So that's my 2 cents. Anyway, going back to my favorites, I pretty much knew who I was going to pick for this win directly after Watkins Glen, and it's someone I that's incredibly good at Daytona on speedways in general, and that's going to be Bubba Wallace. Just the way he handled himself in that post-race interview after finishing top 15, borderline top 10 at Watkins Glen, that was all I had to see. He is in a completely different headspace, one that I've never really seen from Bubba Wallace before, and this has been a steady progression the entire season. He has had to work through pit road mishaps, mental struggles, some lulls in the season here and there, but this is a team that is looking incredibly complete right now. I think when Bubba Wallace has that good head in his shoulders, there is arguably nobody better in the sport in terms of competitiveness, and you go to a track which I think is his best on the circuit. I think he's definitely going to be one of my favorites for the win. Plus 2,000 for the win is insane to me, considering Bubba Wallace has finished runner-up and 3rd place at this track many times. And the big thing for me with Bubba Wallace is not that he hasn't wrecked in any speedway races. It just seems like every single one we go to, he is always there at the end or in the closing laps. And again, he might wreck in those closing laps, but it just seems like they do such an incredible job at putting themselves in position to be there at the end. And I think that they're going to come out and they're going to put their foot down and make a statement that they're here to contend for the playoffs, and they're going to win their way into that 16th spot. So I love Bubba Wallace as my definitive favorite at plus 2,000 and $8,900 for DFS, which is also a great value. And then my other favorite's going to be Bad Brad Keselowski. We'll go with the Killer Bees here. I mean, what else can you say about Brad Keselowski? He's the best on these style tracks in the modern era among active drivers. 7 total wins, only 1 of those at Daytona. But I think this is a driver and a team that's improved so much. They've been one of the best teams in my mind the entire season. It's just a completely different driver, completely different team, completely different organization. And you know that Brad's going to be a contender in these races, every single one of them. He's proven that all throughout his career, especially in 2023, and I think you go to Daytona, you got to pick Brad, especially, he's locked into the playoffs now, so he can play with house money. So an aggressive Brad on these style of tracks is a very dangerous one, both literally and figuratively. So he is, again, top 5 in the odds at plus 1,300, and then 9,300 for DFS, which is another really, really good value.
Yeah, both of those drivers at the back end of the top 10 in odds. I love your logic there in that they're both guys that are going to be there at the end. And I go, when I think of my favorites here, Cole, I'm thinking of 2 guys in the same vein that I know they're going to be there at the end. There would have to be a crazy circumstance that plays out for my 2 favorites to not be there. And the first I will go with is the co-favorite to win the race. Not Chase Elliott, but Denny Hamlin. We go to Daytona, and Denny Hamlin's one of the first guys I think of. He had the back-to-back Daytona 500 victories in 2019 and 2020. A guy that over his 35 starts there, he's completed over 94% of the laps. That's dating back to 2006 when he was a rookie. So it's just so impressive. He's got 3 wins there, 11 top 5s and 12 top 10s. He's just a guy that has a knack for going to finish these races, and we've seen it time and time again at all the super speedways, but especially Daytona. He had the string of 3 straight top 5s there. I know the results have not been there recently, the past couple of years, this year and last year specifically for Denny Hamlin at Daytona, but I just look at what he's done over the course of his career at this track, and the fact that, again, one of those drivers that's kind of racing with house money, just in the sense that they are looking for playoff points, and that's the only thing they're looking for. And I think that Denny Hamlin's going to be a guy that will be there at the end. He's, again, plus 1,200 for the win. There's not a lot of value there. And at DFS, he is valued at $10,200, which is the second most expensive driver. And I think that's money well spent. If you're going to go with a couple of aces in your lineup, it's going to be Denny Hamlin, because you're going to get money well spent there, in addition to the guy I now name, and that is Ryan Blaney. He's the second guy I think of when I think of Daytona. It's a guy that is so consistent there. Top 10s in 3 of the last 4 Daytona races. Top 10s in 5 of the last 7 Daytona races. Had the win there this race in 2021. Really good numbers at Daytona. A guy that, again, he's just always there at the end. We've seen time and time again that the Penske Fords are the best pushers in the field, whether it's Joey, Austin Cindric, who won the Daytona 500 a couple of years ago, Ryan Blaney. I mean, those 3 drivers, if I had to pick one stable where I'm most confident all 3 drivers will have the nose pointed in the right direction with 5 laps to go, it's 1,000% Team Penske. And you mentioned a former Team Penske driver in Brad. He's proven that it wasn't just a Team Penske thing, but I think I look at that stable. I'm so confident in Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, and Austin Cindric, but out of those 3, the most sure bet is Ryan Blaney, who's plus 1,300 for the win, and at 9,900 in daily fantasy, he is the 3rd most expensive driver. So I picked 2 guys in the top 3 as terms of the most expensive to afford in daily fantasy, only trailing Chase Elliott. But the 4 drivers we just picked, Cole, are very, very surefire bets for guys that are going to be there at the end. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If they are not there at the end, something catastrophic would have to happen, which is not out of the question, but I think when I'm looking at especially a daily fantasy lineup, I want some consistency. I want a little bit of peace of mind going into it. You can pick a wild card. There's going to be the random driver that finishes in the top 10 every once in a while. There's certainly those guys out there, and we'll talk about our values in a minute. But in the favorites category, we go to a super speedway. I want to discuss drivers that are favorites to be there with a chance to win at the end. I think those 4 drivers all have that in common.
I feel really damn good about these 4 drivers. These are 4 drivers that are going to lead a bunch of laps and be there at the end, and that's all you could ask for from a DFS sense and a betting sense. So very well done, and I feel really confident in those 4 drivers, even for a track like Daytona. So, and by the way, these are drivers that we did not even converse about. Like, we're going off the cuff here. I'm giving 2, you're giving 2. So for us to have this much agreement on these 4 drivers and that much confidence and comfortability, I think speaks volumes. So I could not agree more.
Now to our sleepers category. These are guys that have an outside chance of winning the race. I got to go, first of all, Cole, with the guy who won the last time we were here. That's Ricky Stenhouse Jr., proving that this season is not a fluke. He's gone on to have some of the best results of his career this season, starting with the big Daytona 500 victory. And I bring him up here because, first and foremost, he is plus 3,000 for the win, 8,500 in daily fantasy, which is the 12th most expensive driver. I mean, what did I say the first week of the season? Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is either going to wreck and be involved in the big one, or he's going to win the whole damn thing. And he won the whole damn thing. So you just look at his results going back to the last 5 years. Let's go back to his last win, 2017, when Ricky Stenhouse won there. Up until he won at Daytona this past time, he had no finish higher than 13th. He didn't have a single top 10 between his 2 wins there. So I think that tells you about the volatility. We talked about it week 1 of the money stop this year. There's volatility. There's immense volatility that comes with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. But if you want one of those wild cards that might be there at the end, why not the guy that won at the beginning of this year, Ricky Stenhouse Jr.? We've seen plenty of drivers sweep Daytona throughout the course of the season, and I don't see any reason to believe why Ricky Stenhouse Jr. can't be the next driver to do that. And again, 12th highest odds. There's not a ton of value there. That's why I called him a sleeper for the win. We'll get into our value picks later, which are guys who might still have an outside chance for the win, but more so are better values. I would be remiss to not mention Ricky Stenhouse Jr. because, again, we mentioned him in this exact same air going into the Daytona 500, and it paid off handsomely for some listeners who heard what we were saying about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. But my other sleeper for the win, Cole, is a guy that's right behind him in terms of the odds, and that is Daniel Suarez. In fact, he's got the same odds for the win, plus 3,000. 13th, though, in daily fantasy at 8,400. I love Daniel Suarez this week because he's one of those hungry drivers that is literally right outside the cutoff line in points, right outside of the cutoff line behind Bubba Wallace. And again, he's right there just outside the top 10 in odds, a guy that hasn't put up the best results at Daytona in his career. However, this past season, or this past Daytona race earlier this season, he posted his first career top 10 in the Cup Series at Daytona. So I'm taking that into consideration. It's hard to overlook when his Trackhouse teammate Ross Chastain earlier this week says something like his one and only goal this week is to push Daniel Suarez into the playoffs. He actually said that this week. I love the idea of Daniel Suarez riding off into the sunset, clinching his way into the postseason. Again, the results haven't been there along his career, but we've seen that team and that driver make strides at tracks they've never ran well at over the course of the past couple years. I know they're motivated. There's a lot of times where he just hasn't had the luck here. He's got 9 DNFs in 12 starts at Daytona, which is crazy to say, but out of the 3 where he's not finished, or out of the 3 where he has finished the race, he's finished in the top 20 all 3 times at Daytona, Daniel Suarez, that is. So he's got just the one top 10. Yes, it was earlier this year, and there's going to be some urgent, hungry drivers, and I think Daniel Suarez is going to be right near the top of that list. They were in the playoffs last year. They know what that feeling is like, and they can kind of strive for it, and there's no reason to think why Daniel Suarez might not be the next wild card to end up in victory lane. Again, this specifically the summer Daytona race has resulted in a first-time winner 4 of the last 5 years in terms of first-time winner that season. So I like the guy who did it earlier this year, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., as a sleeper for the win, and I like a hungry Daniel Suarez also as a guy who could potentially go out there and win this race.
Okay, you kind of convinced me there a little bit in Daniel Suarez. I'm still not as high on him as you are, I would say, just given his overall up and down season and his not so much success on super speedways. But I think hearing those comments of reassurance from Ross Chastain were really cool. And I think he's a good wild card bet, as you referred to him. And then on Stenhouse, I think you did a good job displaying the volatility of him in his career at these tracks. But in my opinion, this is a different Ricky than we've seen ever in the Cup Series. He has been one of the most consistent drivers all year long, and you just know he's going to be in contention at these tracks no matter what. But I think you going into this race where he won earlier this year, the 500, this is a guy that's always in control. He's very aggressive, and just given how consistent he's been all season, I have a bit more confidence in him to go out there and at least finish the race, as opposed to winning or finishing last. So I do like Stenhouse as a good another sleeper bet as well. My 2 drivers, the first one I'm going to go with, it's got to be Brad K's teammate, Chris Buescher. And I think Chris Buescher is a very underrated super speedway racer. Again, one of those drivers I kind of think of when we go to Talladega as opposed to Daytona. But, I mean, you look at this year, Chris Buescher has been, again, one of the most consistent and one of the best Ford teams in the garage area. You couple that with the fact that he led the second most laps at Daytona this year to his teammate Brad Keselowski, and not to mention, he probably would have won this race, either him or Logano, had it not ended under caution. He finished 3rd in that race. He finished 4th at Talladega, and I think just having that relationship with the Fords in the field. You mentioned the prowess of Team Penske. Obviously, Brad and his status on these tracks, it's going to pay off in a very big way for him. I think he's going to be a contender for sure. And I just think, again, speaking on what I said about Brad Keselowski, even more so about Chris Buescher, it's just a different driver, a different team, and a different organization. Like, they're leagues above where they were last year. I think the confidence is there. I think the equipment's there. And I think you look at the Fords, they're always the best pushers in the field. So I think I'd be silly not to consider Chris Buescher as a legitimate dark horse for this win. And speaking on the Fords and Team Penske, I got to mention Austin Cindric. He's one of the guys that is on the lower end. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even give the odds and the values for Chris Buescher. My bad. His odds for the win are plus 1,700, and then his value for DFS is $9,000. So a little bit more on the expensive end for DFS for Chris Buescher, and a little bit of a median driver for in terms of odds. So I think he's properly valued in both regards, honestly. Plus 1,700, $9,000. Anyway, back to Austin Cindric. We mentioned that Penske and their prowess on these tracks, the fact they're really good pushers. Austin Cindric, he won the 500 last year. He finished 3rd in that this race last year, and he's one of those guys. I'm a big guy when we go to tracks like Daytona and Talladega. I want to know that I have more comfortability in a driver that is assertive and knows where to draft and how the air works on track. Austin Cindric's one of those guys. Since he's been in the Cup Series, he has looked very aggressive, very assertive, and I think that's what you need to be in position to win on a super speedway. My only thing is, obviously, he hasn't had the results the entire season, and that's, I get, call it a sophomore slump, whatever, but you erase all that, you go into Daytona. This is anyone's chance to win, and you're in the playoffs, and I think Austin Cindric has as good a shot as anybody to do that with the power under his hood and just the way he handles himself on these tracks. So I think Austin Cindric's going to be more on the low end of the sleepers for me, but I think just having that comfortability and someone that knows how to really drive on these tracks is a reassurance for me. And his odds for the win are plus 2,500, so that'd be one of the guys where I'd throw $5 on if I were to bet him. And then his value for DFS is $7,300, which is the 20th most expensive. So right about halfway. I think that's a really good value, money well spent, and I think that's a driver that you can have a bit of trust in, that he's going to have the speed to compete and contend, and probably go out there and lead some laps as well. So definitely like Chris Buescher over Austin Cindric in terms of sleepers, but I think that both drivers are well enough to be considered for a win at this track.
I love both those picks, especially in terms of a value, Cole. You hit it right on the head with Austin Cindric. At the 20th most expensive driver, I mean, that's just a really good value there. You're seeing Vegas take into account his results this year, his resume this year, and not necessarily take into the fact that he's been really damn good at this track, and he's always had a knack for racing at Daytona. You and I saw it in person in Daytona when he won the 500 that year. It was really a sight to see, and that was in the first race of his rookie season, and he has looked like the same driver behind the wheel, dominant, assertive, and knows his way around that track very instinctively, and that's something that doesn't just happen. And I 100% see that for a guy that is a really good value this week. I know you put him in the sleeper category, but at 20th highest in daily fantasy, that's a borderline lock for me, and I'm a big fan of that. So our four sleepers: Chris Buescher, Austin Cindric, Daniel Suarez, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now to the actual value picks, because there was some value in those guys, but these are real actual value picks, especially these two guys I'm going to name because they're barely in the top 30 in odds. And I'm going to start with Erik Jones, who has a win at this track previously in his career back in 2018, a guy that I don't necessarily think of when we go to Daytona, but I think of him as a sleeper anytime we go to a super speedway, knows his way around these tracks. He's had some pretty bad luck, I feel like, at Daytona and Talladega as of recently, but I think of him more so at Talladega nonetheless. Erik Jones, another guy that's been hovering right around that 20th position in the standings all year. I know he looks at this track and circles it on the calendar as one that 43 team certainly could try and win at, but the key word here is value. 6,700 in daily fantasy. That is the 24th highest odds, borderline lock for me, and plus 3,500 for the win. Again, why not? Throw $5-10 on it. There's no reason why. We've seen so many first-time winners at this track in the past, and Erik Jones would be a perfect first-time Legacy Motor Club winner at this track. I think it'd be impressive to see for a team that's gone through a lot of adversity this year, and it would be a really good high note for them. I just like the arc there, and I just think Erik Jones is a guy that knows his way around these tracks very well. But you speak of first-time winners of Daytona, and it's hard not to discuss Justin Haley, who won his first career Cup Series event at Daytona in 2019, albeit a rain-shortened one, but we've talked about this many times, especially on the Xfinity side. He has been on a hell-bent tear to try and make sure that everyone knows that was not a fluke. He's had some really good runs in the Cup Series at Daytona, including a 6th-place finish there in 2021. He's had some even better finishes at Talladega. Really good Xfinity Series history at these super speedways as well. Justin Haley's a guy that when I think of values at super speedways, he's among the first names I think of. He's run into some tough luck the last 2 Daytona races, finishing outside the top 25 and being caught up in accidents. But when he is, able to keep the nose clean, that's a car I know is going to be up front. Justin Haley, who's talking about super speedway instincts, he's had him since day one in the Cup Series. He's plus 4,500 for the win, way behind the cut line in points, and 6,000 in daily fantasy. That is a borderline lock for me. That's the 29th most expensive driver. Why not throw Justin Haley in there? He's got a win already at this track in the Cup Series, and even more success in the Xfinity Series. We've seen so many surprises every single week of this NASCAR season, and why not Justin Haley added to that mix?
Yeah, I like both those drivers a lot. I think Eric Jones is a guy I think of when we go to Daytona or Talladega. I just think he gets around those style tracks very well. And he's someone that, kind of like similar to Bubba Wallace, I feel like he's usually in contention towards the end. Maybe not as frequently as Bubba, but I think he's one of those guys that I think of personally when I think of contenders late in the race. And Justin Haley, disrespectful odds and value. I don't even know how that's possible. Plus 4,500 for a guy who's won at this track before. He has a boatload of wins on these style tracks in the Xfinity Series. And $6,000, that is a lock. I don't even know how that's possible. Love both those drivers. For me, it's got to be, the first driver is going to be Corey LaJoie. And this is a guy that we always think of when we go to Daytona and Talladega, and now more specifically Atlanta. And I think there's a bit of a misconception about Corey LaJoie at Daytona and Talladega because they've run up front, they've been in contention a handful of times, but he's only led 10 laps between Daytona and Talladega throughout his entire Cup career. So he's not leading laps quite as much. He doesn't even really have that many top 10s at these tracks, but I think people get caught up in just thinking, like, seeing Corey LaJoie win and how it would have come much easier on these style tracks when he was in much more subpar equipment driving for Spire. But this is a different team. They've got a lot of top 15s this year, a lot of top 20s. I think this is a driver that's been much more competitive and much more confident than he's been his entire career. And just coupling that with his ability to navigate these style tracks, I think he's going to be someone to watch. I would be more inclined to pick him for like a top 10 prop bet, but I think he's a good driver to have in your bag for DFS, just given his value at $6,200. And even for the race win, if you wanted to consider him, plus 4,000, so he is just ahead of Justin Haley, which is highly questionable in my opinion. But I think Corey LaJoie is for sure one of those guys you always think of when you go to Daytona and Talladega. My final driver that I'm going to pick, with really no rhyme or reason to it, just pretty much a gut check, is going to be Austin Dillon. Another driver that I think of when we go to Daytona, both for good and bad reasons. He's won this track before. He's been to a lot of wrecks, but I think this is a driver that whenever he goes to these tracks, he knows he has a shot like everybody else, but he just turns a different gear on, and he becomes a different driver. He's very aggressive, and I think having Kyle Busch as a teammate is going to be very beneficial in this race, who, by the way, also has been very good on those style tracks this year. So I think he's going to be someone that's looking to get his teammate into the playoffs, and you're going to want Kyle Busch on your side for sure. But I think just more of a gut check than anything. I like Austin Dillon, and his values are pretty good. I think fairly median at $7,500 for DFS. That's the 19th most expensive in the field. And then for a race winner, he is plus 3,000. I know I said a gut check. I could see him winning this race, but definitely more on the dark horse side. But I like Austin Dillon as a gut check, as a value pick, and I think I have much more confidence in the favorites and the sleepers over the values this week. I'll put it bluntly.
Well, you got to go with your gut, and I feel like that's so important and even understated at these super speedway events, Talladega and Daytona. I feel like it almost goes in phases. Like you said that as soon as last week's race ended, you felt like Bubba Wallace was your guy. And I feel like I kind of have the same feeling about other drivers in the field. And then you get to like this point in the week, going into the weekend, Daniel Suarez is my gut check. That's why I put him in the sleepers category. And right now, Austin Dillon's your gut check. I guarantee you, both you and I are going to wake up on Saturday morning and we're going to have a different driver that we just have a hunch is going to go out there and win this race. It's just going to happen. It could be someone random. It could be an Eric Almirola. Who knows? It could be a completely random driver that we haven't discussed at all. But that's just very important to keep in mind when thinking about Daytona. And again, we're going to find out the qualifying, the starting lineup on Friday night. So that'll be something to keep into consideration too. More so in fantasy in terms of place differential value. Obviously at a super speedway, it's kind of null based on where we've seen drivers come from and how quickly they can come up through the field. But anyhow, that is our four drivers from the value category. We're going to dwindle it to 6 drivers. We're each going to pick one favorite, one value, and one sleeper pick out of those 12 drivers we mentioned. Out of the favorites category, I got to go with Denny Hamlin. Teams just look so good at every track we've gone to, even coming off the runner-up finish at Watkins Glen. Big fan of Denny's this week, one of his best tracks. Again, I mentioned my gut call, Daniel Suarez this week. He's had the good result there this past Daytona race. Maybe they're swinging in the right direction. I think there's a lot of urgency there that could roll in his favor. And I'll go with Justin Haley. I just can't believe plus 4,500, like you said, Cole, it's borderline disrespectful for a guy that's been as productive as he's been in his career in all three NASCAR National Touring Series at super speedways and specifically Daytona, who has won there. I love him as a value this week, so I'll go with those three.
Very nice. Yeah, so for my three drivers, they're all going to be gut checks. As you could tell, I was very, very passionate about Bubba Wallace. He's my favorite for sure. My sleeper is going to be Chris Buescher, and my value pick is going to be Austin Dillon. And just speaking on Bubba Wallace and Chris Buescher specifically, I loved both their values for race winner and for DFS. Again, Bubba Wallace was plus 2,000 and 8,900 for DFS, which was the 10th most expensive. And then Chris Buescher was plus 1,700 and 9,000 for DFS, which was the 9th most expensive, which I think is very respectful and very indicative of how this driver has been all season and how he's been on the style track. So specifically love Bubba and Buescher this week, but Austin Dillon is my value pick and another gut check as well.
Well, how about some big money bets here, Cole? We like to discuss some prop bets. We're going to get into the parlay bets as well, but big money bets, these are ones where you can throw a higher sum of money because only one guy is going to win this race. So there's going to be a couple other guys that fill out the top 3, the top 5, the top 10. And looking at the odds this week, Cole, obviously, as we go to a super speedway, everyone's kind of a long shot for the win. There's definitely money to be made. I kind of like to compare it to horse racing. Like you can pick a horse to finish or to place, as they call it, someone that finishes on the podium in the top 3. I think if you're going to pick somebody for the win, there's a good chance they might lose the race by like 0.02 of a second. And you're going to be down so bad if that happens. You're going to want to cry, quite simply. So if you're going to pick anyone for the win, I highly recommend placing a prop bet additionally on them to finish in the top 3, the top 5, because you just don't know how the race is going to finish up. He could lose by less than a car length, by a nose, and you're not going to want to you have to suffer from that. So I think pick your favorite driver and just put a good amount of money on them to finish in the top 5 or top 10. I think that is good fantasy advice, betting advice when you go to a super speedway. On that note, we talked about our favorites category, those drivers that are a guarantee to be there at the end. Brad Keselowski, Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney are all of our favorites in that category up there. They're all guys that will probably be there in the top 5. I think pick any of those favorites. Denny Hamlin's plus 80 to be in the top 5. Ryan Blaney's plus 190, as is Brad Keselowski. And you mentioned Bubba Wallace as well. He's plus 225 to be in the top 5. So any 3 or 4 of those, I think it's kind of hard to pick a surefire big money bet because you're not going to place any large sum of money on any Daytona bet and be that confident in it. But more so than anything, as we just kind of glance over the prop bets here, I think it's important to note if you're going to pick a driver for the win and put money on him, I think you also need to put money on their prop bet for a top 3 and or top 5.
Perfect advice. I was going to say the exact same thing pretty much. I'm not a big fan of big money bets for Daytona and Talladega. I think the advice I gave in picking 2 favorites and betting $10 for the race win and then 3 dark horses at $5 for the win, I think that's the way I would approach it. I mean, that way you already have $35 out there. I think if you were to put another bet out there that was a finishing prop bet, it would be an insurance one, as you mentioned. So for me, I think Bubba Wallace is going to win this race. I would put enough money on there at him at top 5 at plus 225 to where I'd make my money back or maybe a little bit more than $35. But for me personally, I don't really like making the top 5, top 3, top 10 prop bets. It's all you put $35 out there, pick your 5 drivers for the win, and let it ride. And then if you want to throw an insurance one out there for somebody you feel really good about, then that would be my one outside bet.
Yeah, that's smart advice. There's no true big money bets. There is a lot of big money to be made, though. As we look at the parlayable bets this week, per bet MGM, there's always 5. You can pick 2 or 3 of your favorites. You can do all 5 if you're feeling really lucky, but at a race like Daytona, it's going to be really tough to ace all 5 of these. So these are head-to-head bets. Bubba Wallace or Ty Gibbs, who, by the way, is another one of my gut checks. I feel really good about Ty Gibbs this week as another one of those guys just outside the playoff standings. So Bubba Wallace versus Ty Gibbs. You've got a couple Hendrick Chevys, Chase Elliott versus Alex Bowman. Bowman is even, so Chase Elliott minus 125 to be in front of Bowman, and Bubba in that other one I just mentioned was minus 125. Ty Gibbs plus 100. And then you've got basically equal odds. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. minus 115 to finish in front of Michael McDowell, who's minus 110 to beat out Stenhouse. Then a couple Penske Fords with those same odds. Ryan Blaney versus Joey Logano. They're minus 115 and minus 110 respectively. And then a couple of Joe Gibbs Toyotas. Denny Hamlin minus 125, favored to finish in front of Martin Truex Jr., who's plus 100. So those are all kind of coin tosses, Cole. I feel like there's a little bit more to discuss, a little bit more rhyme or reason when we go to a regular track on parlayable bets. These are absolutely kind of like, again, pick your poison. It's like these are all five very comparable drivers. Like you've got the two Hendricks, you've got the two Penskes, you've got the two sleepers for the win in Stenhouse or McDowell. You've got a couple guys that have not won at Daytona before in Ty Gibbs and Bubba Wallace, both with either the Toyotas, whether it's 2311 or Joe Gibbs, and you've got the two Joe Gibbs Toyotas. So I advise, if you're feeling pretty lucky going with these, but it's a slippery slope. I don't think you're expecting to put money on these bets, and that's reflected by the fact that they're all almost equal odds. I don't think you're putting money on those and expecting a secure bet, I guess you could say. So is there any, I guess I'll ask Cole, is there any of those that really stick out to you as a really good bet this week?
No, that was well said. It's literally a coin toss. I mean, if I were to pick one, I like Denny Hamlin to finish over Martin Truex Jr. at which is minus 125. I think that is likely going to be a lock, but again, it's Daytona. I would not even consider any of these. They're all extremely close matchups. There's no one driver that usually has the edge over the other, aside from that Denny and Truex one. But no, you're not. You want to make money. You're not doing these matchups and the parlays. You're doing race winner bets. I advise not to do it as well.
And to evidence that, I just picked the three drivers that were the most favored to finish in front of the others, and I parlayed them together. So I did Denny Hamlin to finish in front of Truex, Chase Elliott over Alex Bowman, and Bubba Wallace over Ty Gibbs. Each of them minus 125. You parlay those three things to happen, it's plus 483. You can pick the favorite to win this race at plus 1,200. It just doesn't make any sense to do it this week. So, if you're feeling really lucky, I just don't advise it this week. But got to mention it one way or another. Cannot close out this episode, though, Cole, without discussing our daily fantasy lineup recommendation. A lot of familiar names in this daily fantasy lineup. We like our drivers that are going to be there at the end, Cole. One that we have not discussed very much, but he's our most expensive driver, in fact, in this lineup recommendation, is Joey Logano. I've talked about him kind of looping all the Penske Fords together in that they're always there at the end. I have more confidence in that team as a whole to win this race than probably any other. And we talked about Austin Cindric. He was one of our sleepers. We talked about Ryan Blaney. He was one of our favorites. I think Joey Logano is just as easily one of the favorites, and he's money well spent at 9,800. Next up on the list, Brad Keselowski. We touched on him, 9,300. Third most expensive driver is Chris Buescher at 9,000. Bubba Wallace at 8,900. So those are four really solid drivers, which means we've got some cheap ones in there to round it out, and they're also two of our favorite values. Corey LaJoie at 6,200. And Justin Haley somehow at 6,000. I feel like I don't want to exude too much confidence again because we're going to Daytona. It's a complete wild card. The odds of you winning this race by having any sort of a calculated lineup in a daily fantasy matchup are slim to none. But based on what we know and what we've discussed and what the history says, it's a pretty well-rounded lineup.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I feel very confident in it as well. Me personally, I would stay away from a DFS lineup. I just think there's more money to be made by betting on the race winner. But, I mean, up and down, it looks really good. I know, we didn't mention Joey Logano, but he is an incredible super speedway racer. He leads a lot of laps. He finished second in the 500, and he won in Atlanta this year. He's been in contention in every single super speedway race, I think, this year. I think, honestly, going back to like the last 5 years, it feels like, whenever he got TJ Majors as a spotter, he's been really damn good on these tracks. So I know we didn't mention him, but you said you felt most confident in him from that Penske stable. I'm the exact same way. So I like Joey Logano a lot as well. Bubba Wallace is my personal favorite for the win. BK is going to lead a bunch of laps, probably be there at the end. Same with Chris Buescher being his teammate. And then, I think Haley and LaJoie, kind of a coin toss there, but I think they're both esteemed enough on these tracks that they'll be in contention and be competitive at least.
Well, Cole, let's pick our race winner picks now. We both, again, failed pretty miserably with these last week. They both ran into trouble in Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson. I did pick first last week, though, so you have the pleasure of picking first, and you pretty much showed your hand pretty early.
Yeah, Bubba Wallace, that's a no-brainer. I just love where this driver and this team is at right now. I've never seen him more confident and more composed since he's been in the Cup Series. I think that's a dangerous thing for the rest of the field, and I think that he's really going to go out there and make a statement victory. I've been envisioning it in my mind the last couple days, and I just feel very strongly about Bubba Wallace for Daytona.
Yeah, I'll be honest, there's not that one guy that's really, really sticking out to me right now. I think it'll come to me by Saturday, but I feel pretty strongly about Denny Hamlin this week. I just love what I've seen from that team and that driver the last few weeks, whether it's been a road course, an intermediate track. Every track we go to, Denny has always been a top 5 car, it feels like. And you just go to Daytona, again, he's one of the first guys I think of. I've mentioned a lot. I've got a lot of confidence in the Penske cars in being there at the end, but I really see Denny Hamlin having another strong week at Daytona this week and potentially punching another 5 points on the ledger as we head into the playoffs. So I'm picking Denny Hamlin for the win, long story short. And for my sleeper at a super speedway, I've always got to go with the gut call. And right now, that gut call is Daniel Suarez. I just feel pretty good about him this week. Plain and dry. There's not much else to say about it. We've said all that needs to be said. But who's your sleeper?
My sleeper, I'm going to go with my gut check in Austin Dillon. I know I didn't do a great job in really instilling a lot of confidence in him during my analysis of him as a value pick, but he's just one guy that, again, popped in my head early in the week to where I think he's going to have a really solid day and potentially have a shot at the win.
You're right about that. This is one of the best race weekends of the year. Again, it's probably, if we're going to be completely honest, it's probably going to be a driver that we didn't say once. Like, it's probably going to be Kevin Harvick or something like that, that goes out there and wins when we're least expecting it. But and by the way, we didn't even mention William Byron either. It may as well be him, right? But this is the Coke Zero Sugar 400 at Daytona. It used to be the 4th of July race weekend, which we loved, but it's been a really, really fun playoff cutoff race because there's just so many different possibilities of what can happen, and it makes for such an entertaining race. I feel like every single year under this format of this being the cutoff race, it's always a memorable one. As much as we loved it around the 4th of July, and it was great around that time of year for the memories in and of itself with regards to that, it's such a good cutoff, and I'm so excited for it. It's going to be a 7:05 green flag this upcoming Saturday on USA Network. Cannot wait to watch it. Coke Zero Sugar 400. We're going to drop the jack here on the most important stop of the day. Let us know what your bets are. Follow us on social media at @the_money_stop. If there is a driver that we didn't mention that you maybe want to discuss and hear what maybe the outlook is for them entering Daytona, let us know at @the_money_stop, at Steven_Cusumano, at Cole_Cusumano_ on Twitter. There's a lot to be discussed. We tried to touch on most of it, but there's obviously endless possibilities as we go to Daytona. So for Cole, I'm Steven. For Kicking the Tires and Sharp Link Gaming, we're signing off, dropping the jack on the most important stop of the day. Thank you all so much, and we hope you make lots of money this week as we head to Daytona, and then next week, it's on to the playoffs.